Alrighty then. Here's the Metallist once again. And we have a new ranking list here. This one is going to be Deep Purple. Now, for me, I have the albums ranked as the 20th century albums ranked, aka I don't really know any Deep Purple records released after 2000. And I think there's about 6 or 7 of them at this point. I've heard good things about them. I've just never gotten around to them. I've heard Infinity's pretty good. I heard Now What's pretty good. I've heard Wish is pretty good. I heard Bananas is terrible. Rapture of the Deep, like I said, I've heard different things. I know they just put out a covers album, and if you've seen my video on the ranking of the UFO albums, and I do all of those, by the way. If you've seen the ranking of the UFO albums, you know the covers album came in last because it just didn't sound good. And I don't know, Purple might be better, but haven't really heard that one either. So this is just albums from the beginning of their career to the end of the century, which would be 1999, 2000. But I think the last album they released was in 98. Matter of fact, I think that's the first thing up. So let's get going. All right, so we got 16 albums total here. So coming in again at number 16 is, hold on, there we go, Abandon from 1998. And I think this is the last album to feature John Lord. And the second album to feature Steve Morse, you see him over there on the right. I don't know, this one just never caught me. I mean, what I do when I rank these albums is I go back and look at the titles of the songs. And in this case, I didn't recognize any of them except the cover of Bloodsucker, which is spelled incorrectly. They have another song in there called Any Fool Know That that's spelled weird. I'm like, what are you guys, rap guys? You're not rap guys. Sorry. So yeah, this album just never really caught me. And consequently, I haven't bought a Deep Purple album since. Live stuff, of course. I've got like 60 live albums by Deep Purple, but nothing past this point for me. So I figured that was a good place to kind of do it. So, I did my video, if you haven't seen, about what's wrong with 21st century Iron Maiden. So I don't know if there's anything wrong with 21st century Deep Purple or not. I did see them, I think, one time with Don Arian. No offense to Don Arian, but man, it was not the same. I mean, losing Richie was one thing, and that was, quite a jump. But I mean, when you bring in a guy that was basically retired from Guitar Player magazine for winning Guitar Player of the Year so many years, you have a good person stepping in. But, and like I said, no offense to Don, I've seen him with Ozzy and a bunch of other different bands. I mean, he's been all over the place for a lot of years. And from what I've heard, he has improved because I think he's taken in that more Lord Hammond B3 sound as time goes on from the little bits I do know about the new stuff. But anyway, so like I said, this album just didn't catch me. I was glad to go see the tour because that was the last tour, of course, that John did. And so that's about all I have to say about that one. So then next up, coming at 15, this is the third album, weirdly titled just Deep Purple. So this is the third album and the last album from the Mark I lineup. You see Brad Evans, their original vocalist, there in yellow, and standing next to him to the right, that is Nick Simper, who is the bass player at that point. And of course, then you have, excuse me, you have Richie, Ian, and John, who were the mainstays for many, many years. So the biggest thing about this, again with this album, is memorability. The cover's pretty memorable. I think this is somebody's vision of hell or something. It's some artist's vision of hell or something I heard one time or another. Like I say, feel free to correct me on that if I'm wrong. But again, I kind of went through the song titles. I'm like, I don't know. I don't really remember any of this stuff. So that being said, so that's the last of the Mark I records, just titled Deep Purple, when that came out in 1969. Next up, moving all the way ahead to 1990, we have an album here called Slaves and Masters. So through the years, there's been a lot of infighting between Richie and Ian Gillan. And at this point, Ian decided to go on his merry way, or was given the Spanish archer, as they like to call it, the elbow. So at this point, Ian was not in the band. They wanted to continue on. It's like, well, what are we going to do for a singer? So Richie hires his former singer from Rainbow, Joe Lynn Turner, a fine singer, probably one of the best pure rock singers out there. And this is a fine record. If it was a Rainbow album, if you stuck Rainbow on the cover, I'd be like, oh, yeah, this is pretty good. And it is pretty good, but it sounds like a Rainbow album. Can't get over it. Sorry. I just can't. But it's a good record. I mean, what was it? King of Dreams is a good song. Fire in the Basement's kind of a fun little rocker. I mean, not too fancy, but it was pretty good. What was the other one? Truth Hurts. It's kind of a cool ballad. I mean, so yeah, there's some good songs in there. And then I don't write any of this stuff down. I just remember what I remember about these albums. So yeah, but like I said, it was a good record. I actually had front row seats for this tour, and not surprisingly, it got canceled because I don't think it was selling very well, and I don't think the album sold very well either. But it's not a bad record. I mean, I probably should file it with Rainbow, but that's okay. So that was the album Slaves and Masters. Next up. All right, going a few years back to 87. This is The House of Blue Light. And again, this album wasn't bad, but Purple throughout their history, you may or may not agree with me on this, tended to be a bit of a roller coaster. They put out an album that was just killer, and then the next record was kind of a hiccup, but then all of a sudden the next record was really killer again. So it kind of went back and forth like that for quite a while. This was the last album to feature Ian for about 6 years. And again, just not as catchy as its predecessor, and we'll talk about its predecessor here in a little bit. But there's still some good songs. There were some fun songs there. One called "Mad Dog" I thought was kind of fun. Was the big hit, quote unquote. I can hear it in my head, but I can't think of the title. They had a video for it. They had another silly one called "Call of the Wild." That was kind of fun. Mitzi Dupree's kind of a fun song too. Spanish Archer's cool. I mean, there's some good stuff on there. Bad Attitude, I think, was the name of the song I was trying to think of. It was like the lead single. That was pretty good too. Again, not a bad record, but for me, a big slide from the previous album, which was Perfect Strangers. But like I say, we'll talk about that here in a little while. All right. Well, the Book of Taliesin. Okay, so back to the Mark I lineup. Well, I mean, there was some really good stuff on these records. Again, like I say, I kind of get this one and the next one coming up kind of mixed up, but there was a lot of good stuff on there. I don't remember if this album has Mandrake Root on it or the other one, but that was kind of the good jam. That was the big jam song prior to bringing Space Trucking into the lineup. And again, like I say, I'm just going off the top of my head here. But there was some good stuff on both these albums. A lot of cover songs. They were kind of doing cover songs at this point quite a bit. And I think the next album has Hush on it, so I don't think Hush is on this one. But again, like I say, I get these two kind of intertwined. They're very similar, I think, as far as the type of albums that we're talking about here. And in addition to that, number 11 is Shades of Deep Purple. This is their very first album, also released in 1968. And Hush was a big single for them, at least in America. It took a little while, I think, for them to really catch on in England the way they did in the States right out of the gate. So this is the first of the 3 Mark I albums. And again, with Nick Simper and Rod Evans. Rod Evans later went on to a band called Captain Beyond that a lot of people really like. I don't think I've really ever heard them, but sort of, I guess, sort of a weird progressive leaning from what I understand. Never checked it out. If you have some recommendations on Captain Beyond, that would be fabulous. And then also Nick had a band called, I think, Warhorse, that I heard was pretty solid, sort of Mark I sounding Deep Purple-ish as well. But again, don't know much about that either. So anybody has any suggestions, I'm all for you. All right, moving on. Number 10, Purpendicular from 1996. This is the first album, features Steve Morse. And really good record, really fun tour because the tension of Richie was gone. But a lot of times that tension was something that made things kind of great. But yeah, it was interesting because I did see this particular tour at the University of Akron, and it was interesting how the band was just so in love with this guy, just so glad to have him in the band that actually when Steve took a solo, the rest of the band were just sitting at the side of the stage watching. I was like, wow, that's different. But good show, good record. Ted the Mechanic opens the album, has a really cool riff from Morris. The first 4 songs just really get me. It kind of tails off after that. But that one's great. Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming is amazing. Probably my favorite song on the record. Remember what the second song is. The second song sounds like kind of like a Kansas song, which is interesting because if you may or may not know that Steve Morse was also in Kansas for a brief time. And like I said, the name of that one escapes me. But yeah, the first 4 songs on there kind of really got me going. And after, sometimes I feel like screaming, it kind of tailed off. I mean, The Aviator was pretty good. And there was a couple other things that weren't bad. But again, like I say, I'm just going from memory here. All right, so let's move on. Number 9, The Battle Rages On, 1993. So they decided to bring Ian back. This is the 3rd trip through for the Mark II lineup. And I tried to keep the pictures, current to that particular album. So at this point, a lot of people, like I said, this album was kind of much maligned. I remember reading one review that said, it was as bad as when Rod Evans, like around 1980, Rod Evans went out and tried to go out with a band and call it Deep Purple. And, people were expecting like Richie and Ian, and they're getting the Mark I singer and nothing else. And I guess it was a major disaster. But, people were equating it to that. I'm like, oh, come on. And honestly, I think it's a pretty good record. And like I say, the title track, Battle Rages On, is great. There's a fun little song in there called Time to Kill. Just like I said, it was a pretty good record. Twisting the Tail. I mean, a lot of good stuff. And they had a good live DVD from that tour. Although, interestingly enough, they opened the show with Highway Star, and there's no guitar for some reason. That's because Richie's not on the stage. And he finally shows up just in time to do his solo, and it's hilarious because, like, when he walks out, Ian's kind of like, Your Majesty, so nice of you to show up. And he does his solo, and he's just blazing. I mean, he is just killing it, right? But he's not paying any attention to what he's doing. He's looking off stage someplace, and all of a sudden he grabs a glass of water. He throws it over in John's direction. It's like, what is going on here? So yeah, if you get to see that video, I think it's called Come Hell or High Water is the title of it. If you get a chance to YouTube that, or locate the DVD of it or something like that, it's a pretty interesting watch. So would recommend that one. But again, this album I liked a lot better than I think most people did. But this was the end of the band for Richie Blackmore. And he left a couple years later, was filled in briefly by Joe Satriani, and then they finally hired Steve Morse, and the rest has been history from there. All right, next up. This was an album as a kid I didn't really like. And as time goes on, this album has really sort of come up the ladder on the catalog list here. This is Come Taste the Band. This is the one and only appearance of Tommy Bolin with them. A lot of people really big Tommy Bolin fans. Poor guy was only like 25 when he died. He was hopelessly addicted to heroin. If you can find, there's a live record from this era. There's a weird title. It was like The Wings of a Russian Foxbat or something like that. But the liner notes are amazing. I mean, they should just retitle this The Destruction of a Band. Because at the time, like I said, at this point, we brought in David Coverdale, of course, later of Whitesnake fame. The amazing Glenn Hughes, who could have easily been the lead vocalist, but they wanted that bluesier side, so that's where Coverdale came in. But anyway, the interesting part about it was, like I said, Glenn was like really coked up at the time, and he had some problems with that all the way through his tenure with Black Sabbath, clear into the mid '80s. Like '86, I think, was when he supposedly was with Black Sabbath, and Tommy Bolin was just hopelessly addicted to heroin. And I mean, there are live recordings. I think there's one called Last Concert in Japan, where they're opening the show with Burn. And if you know the song Burn, you know that the guitar riff is paramount to this song. And all of a sudden, there's no guitar. And I read in the liner notes of the album I already mentioned that basically Tommy had shot up some heroin right before the show, and his left arm went numb. A little hard to play guitar with a numb arm, especially the left one. So that was the problem there. So I mean, this is really a weird time for the band, and like I say, a lot of drugs, and of course they did disintegrate after this, and were not a band for quite some time. So Come Taste the Band, like I say, is the only feature of Tommy Bolin, but some really good songs there. But like I said, definitely had that funk vibe to it, and that was something that Richie was not into. Henceforth, Richie had left, and at this point in the same year, he put out the very first Rainbow album with the immortal Ronnie James Dio. Basically, it was Elf with Richie playing guitar. But yeah, this turned out, like I said, as time's going on, I really like it. Coming Home is a great song. Lady Luck is awesome. Getting Tighter is a little funky, fun thing. I mean, it really sounds like 70s funk. I mean, I could just see like Earth, Wind, and Fire up there. All they needed was a horn section. So there's a lot of funk, but I mean, there was some good bluesy stuff too from David, like a song called Dealer. It was really, really good. Like that one a lot. Ode to G is a fun little instrumental, and then You Keep On Moving is a good one. Coast to Coast, which Glenn still does Coast to Coast. There's an acoustic version of Coast to Coast out there. If you can find that by Glenn Hughes, the guy has pipes beyond belief. He's a little much for some people. Some people like no, this guy's too much. He's just too over the top. But me personally, I'm a fan. He's one of my favorite singers. But so, like I said, Come Taste the Band, when it came out, I was like, you know, I was kind of definitely heading in the rainbow direction, particularly when Rising came out the following year. Wow. Maybe I need to do a rainbow ranking after this. So that's where we're at with number 8. Number 7, the album prior to that, the last one with Richie. This is Stormbringer, 1974. I was fortunate enough to see this tour. That was the first time I got to see Deep Purple. And I was very glad because, I mean, at the time I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't Gillan and Glover. But looking back, it's like, man, how many people got to see the Mark III lineup? Probably not that many because they only really existed for a couple of years. And that was the interesting about Deep Purple back then. From like 68 to 74, they had 3 bass players, 3 singers, and they cranked out like, geez, I don't know how many albums. I'd have to count on my fingers, but it's got to be like 6, 7 albums easy, you know, in such a short time, and did all those tours and the live records and everything. Oh, it was unbelievable the amount of work those guys were putting in, and that's basically what made Ian Gillan leave in '73. So, but anyway, Stormbringer, good album. Title track's awesome. Love Don't Mean a Thing is a fun song. Um, Glenn has a great middle section in that song. If you haven't heard it, you need to go check that out. Hold On is a good song. Highball Shooter, Lady Double Dealer, a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff. I mean, still heavy, but that funk edge was crawling in, and that was enough to make Richie say, "I'm on my way." All right, next up, the reunion album. So after Come Taste the Band in '75, I think they may have toured until maybe April of that year, and then I think they quit soon after that. Tommy Bolin died, I think, in December '76, maybe, but he was already out of the band, and like I say, that was a shame. I know a lot of people are big fans of Tommy Bolin, and he did a lot of work for a guy that was so young. So this was the big reunion, the Mark II lineup back together. Really kind of a big deal. And I mean, I was just floored because I never thought I'd get to see them. I was excited that I got to see Ian Gillan the year before with call it Black Sabbath. It was more like Electric Purple Sabbath because then they ended up having Bev Bevan from the Electric Light Orchestra on the drums. So that was pretty crazy. But yeah, so this was a big deal. The title track, awesome, great song. Interestingly enough, not really much of a solo from Richie, which is unusual. But again, you know, that song's great. I say there's some cool stuff too. There's like a 12-inch single that has a tune on there. They call it "Son of Alaric" or something like that. And it pretty much just sounds like they got together and they just switched the tape on. They started jamming, and it's about a 12-minute jam. If you can find that out there someplace, that's really cool too. But you know, again, "Perfect Strangers" is awesome. Of course, you know, "Knocking at Your Back Door" was another big song in there. "Hungry Days" is a cool song. Kind of has that Middle Eastern feel that Richie so often puts into the songs. And but over time, I would say this album didn't age as well as I maybe had hoped. I mean, you know, back when it came out, it's like, oh man, it was right at the top of the list for me. You know, but again, you know, it had been almost a decade since I had any Deep Purple, and it'd be even more than a decade long since we had any Deep Purple from this particular lineup of guys. So yeah, it was definitely a big deal. You know, went to see the reunion tour twice. And I remember because the second night that they played, I guess, you know, Blackmore was in one of his moods, and they didn't play "Smoke on the Water," and everybody's losing their minds. I'm like, who cares? You know, I mean, it's not that it isn't a great song, but haven't we all heard it enough? You know, quite frankly, they could drop a lot of the standards and play some, you know, deeper cuts, and I would be happy with that. But and maybe they do that now. I don't know. Like I said, I have not seen Deep Purple since 2003, maybe somewhere in there. But that was a cool show because it was Purple, Scorpions, and Dio. So that was a good lineup. All right, so getting up near the top here, top 5. 1973, Who Do We Think We Are? This is the last album from the first run of the Mark II lineup. Keeping score, everybody. Good record. I like this record a lot, actually. Woman from Tokyo was the big song on there, but Super Trooper is a cool song. Um, Smooth Dancer is a cool song. Supposedly that's a little bit of a dig at Richie. Um, I've heard that. I don't know if it really is or not. Our Lady's a cool song. There's some good stuff on here, but again, kind of a drop back from. I mean, this was the follow up to Machine Head, so again, sort of that roller coaster vibe that I was talking about before. But again, they had worked so hard and so long that, I mean, I guess Ian put in a 6 months notice that he was going to leave the band, and they didn't do anything about it, amazingly enough. And for some reason, they sent Roger Glover along with him, and then that's when they brought in Coverdale and Hughes, and never missed a beat, to be honest. But still, it was just amazing that they wouldn't try to keep this going and just give these guys a little bit of a break. You can find out some of that stuff. Ian Gillan has an autobiography, and I have another book on Deep Purple that I've read, and you know, just kind of a shame because they should have tried to keep this lineup going a little longer. 4, first album from Mark III. This is when they brought in the unknown David Coverdale, and they brought in Glenn Hughes from Trapeze, which I'm a big Trapeze fan too, like them a lot. This was the following year, so I mean, these guys wasted no time. And Burn, just the song Burn is just amazing. That is worth the price of admission alone. I mean, one of the best from Pace, Lord, and Blackmore. Blackmore has a great solo. John has a great solo, and pretty much Ian just like solos through the whole thing. Really great. And some good bluesy swag from Coverdale. Might just take your life. Great song there. Sail Away is another one that has that kind of bluesy vibe. Then some great drumming on You Fool No One. Lots of cowbell for you people that want more cowbell. Yeah, that's your song right there. Album is kind of weird. It's got like a weird little electronic thing called A200. It's like an electronic instrumental thing, kind of a John Lord thing. But again, of the time, I mean, that's kind of how you can date most records, by what the keyboards sound like. But again, a really fantastic album. I was really amazed, after Gillan had left, that they could bounce back with something this great. All right, the top 3, probably no big surprises here. Fireball. I was having a discussion with my buddy Cliff, shout out to Cliff, and some of his buddies here about this album recently. One of his buddies said this was his favorite Deep Purple album. That's cool. I think this album is kind of underrated and a little misunderstood. Again, it was kind of in between 2 behemoth albums, which we'll be talking about shortly. But I think it's a little more experimental than the other albums that they did. And Ian Gillan has often said this is his favorite Deep Purple album. The song Fireball, one of the few times the only time I can think of that Ian Pace plays double bass drums. And I often thought, man, his foot is fast, because I only ever saw him play a single, until I saw one particular live video where they were bringing out an extra bass drum so they could play Fireball live. I'm like, so I had no clue Ian even played a double bass kit ever. So that was pretty interesting. So I mean, that's a great song. Fools is one of my favorite songs of theirs of all time. Just a very trippy but very heavy, gritty song. Really good. But then there's some fun stuff on there. Anyone's Daughter is kind of a goofy song, but it's fun. No 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 is a fantastic song. Depending on what version of the sound, you might have Strange Kind of Woman, or you might have Demon's Eye, or maybe you'll have both. Like I say, depending on what version of Fireball you happen to pick up. But all good stuff. No One Came was a fun little song too, all about being a rock star basically. And then of course the Mule, which became the vehicle for Ian Pace's solos at that point. And I think I rattled off every song on the album. But yeah, really good stuff, obviously. All right, so here come the big ones, and you're probably going, which one's going to go first? Well, believe it or not, it's Machine Head. And I mean, what can you say about this album that hasn't been said? Obviously, Smoke on the Water is a big deal. Highway Star, Space Truckin', Lazy. I mean, all just like big songs on the set. But even the other songs, like Pictures of a Home, is one of my all-time favorites. They do play that quite a bit, I think, nowadays. But that's a fantastic song. Another one was just some great work from John and Richie and Pacey. I mean, just good stuff. So, and then of course, even the funny part was, I think it was Never Before was supposed to be the big single, and that's the song probably most people remember, at least that, and Maybe I'm a Leo. Speaking of Maybe I'm a Leo, if you check it out. Government Mule does a really cool version of Maybe I'm a Leo. Check that out if you get the chance. So that's really good stuff. So all that's left, of course, is the #1 album. And this record is actually the reason I got into hard rock and heavy metal to begin with. Deep Purple and Rock. Unbelievable record. I mean, life-changing record for me. Just a groundbreaking album. I mean, this album came out at the same time as like Black Sabbath's Paranoid record and Uriah Heep, and of course some of the early Led Zeppelin. Like Zeppelin might have been up to Zeppelin 3 at this point, which was more of an acoustic album. But as far as just being a heavy record, and while Sabbath was heavy and Uriah Heep was heavy, they didn't have the virtuosity that these guys do, and in my opinion. I've always said that Uriah Heep is a poor man's Deep Purple, and that's not a slight on the Heap at all. I love the Heap. Saw the Heap here probably back in 2015, and I know Mick Box is the only guy there, but they've had a steady lineup for decades, and they were fantastic. I mean, they far exceeded my expectations. So, I mean, Heap has always been a very consistent band, and they're still going, and I'm very glad they do. But again, this is the album here. I mean, Speed King, Child in Time, Bloodsucker, Flight of the Rat. I mean, just so good. I mean, this record just blew my mind when I was a kid. I mean, I went from like Beatles and Stones, and all of a sudden I hit this, and like off the deep end, it was over. It was over. So yeah, this is my all-time favorite Deep Purple record. Not by much though. Machine Head is pretty amazing, gotta say. But this is the one that started it for me. I was actually a Purple fan before Machine Head. So all right, guys. Well, I appreciate you listening to me. I do ramble on a little bit when I start talking about Purple. But again, thanks again. And hope everybody enjoyed the show. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you all next time.